Hello, everybody, and welcome to our panel, which is going to focus on commercialization 2.0, where we're going to discuss new commercial models that are available to address the new normals in our realities today. You know, the past 6 months has really changed the customer experience across industries. And in pharma, we've moved quickly to replace our face-to-face access, which has kind of been our primary, with digital and virtual engagements in order to continue to have that discussion with our customers. And it's really opened new avenues for the future as well. And I think that's a good thing, because I think it's unlikely that our face-to-face access that we have enjoyed historically will ever get back to that old level. So in this panel, we're going to really focus on strategies, innovations, and ideas that life science industry should evaluate for new models of commercialization that can quickly react and adapt to deliver a great customer experience. Fortunately, I've got some great people along with me to have this discussion. So Barty Rai is Vice President of Commercial Operations, Data and Analytics at Novartis. Florent Edouard is Senior Vice President, Global Head of Commercial Excellence at Grunthal Group, former colleague of mine at AstraZeneca. Patrick Berry is Executive Vice President and President of Global Commercial Operations at Endo. And Ashish Jaju is Vice President, Head of Global Digital Marketing and Commercialization at Mylan. So welcome to all of you. I thought I'd kind of open our discussion today with one historical question, and that's when things changed for us back in March collectively, what was the one biggest immediate adjustment or capability adaptation that you needed to effectuate within your organizations in order to deliver the business? Florent, you want to jump in first? Oh, go ahead, Barty.
Sure. John, I can start. It seems so far away, right, March? I think there were a few things that we as an organization did at that point. The first thing I remember is that, we were thinking in weeks and hours, and the fact that this is going to end soon, right, in weeks. I think that was the first thing that said, okay, how do we respond to this, quickly? Where do we meet our customers? How do we be empathetic to our physician offices and really act with EQ, and now is not the time to be actively selling as a pharmaceutical, and really try to meet the customers when, where, how they want to meet us. That was sort of the biggest thing. And then I think as I look at the organization itself, I think our biggest change was getting cross-functional teams to forget about organizational boundaries and lines, work in an agile fashion on whatever the need of the hour or the week was. And at the same time, I think the recognition that every employee is an individual and they're dealing with their own personal situation at home. And, the long hours, the long days full of meetings back to back would not be sustainable. So I think those are some of the early things going on in our mind that later on we adapted and said, okay, it doesn't seem like this is going to end in weeks. And how do we pivot the organization?
Good.
I think, John, on our side, we are looking at East already. And when we saw what was happening in China, we were, okay, that's going to stay in China. And then, I recall perfectly Aldo, our GM in Italy, calling me and saying, Florent, we will have a massive problem. We are all going to get grounded. And at which point we said, okay, we need to do something. And there we triggered like an emergency SWAT team. Some people were tasked to get e-consent. Some people were creating trainings. Some people were readjusting all the contents and everything that we were doing to be able to do it remotely. And we called the Viva guys and said, okay, guys, we need in 1 month to be able to do remote calling everywhere on the planet, from, north of Europe down to Chile. Is that feasible? And of course they said, okay, that's a bit, but yes, why not? And in fact, we made it. And that's how we, instantly refocused everyone. Okay, let's do together something that is new, something that's going to be beneficial for the patients and for the HCPs, because we give them back all their time and we'll talk to them only when they want to talk to us on their own ways. And I think the adoption rate was huge, and we are never going to come back from that. I mean, we know this capability we have now, and that was our immediate first reaction.
Good. Patrick?
Yes, similar to Barty, I think that in the early days, and it continued on, it was really about employee safety and being sensitive to that, and quickly empathizing with what our customers were going through. And we quickly realized, and it was an important transition to say, this idea of a new normal and going back to the way it was, really pushing that mindset out relatively quickly. And we transitioned pretty fast to understanding that this was going to be an extended period of time and an extended challenge. So we made the decision to equip our folks within about a month and a half to go all virtual. And so it was a rapid execution of the Viva Engage platform within about 4 to 5 weeks, so that we can transition pretty quickly to be able to engage with our customers in a much more impactful way than we were in the first 4 or 5 weeks.
Great. Ashish, anything different at Mylan?
So I don't think it was much different, but definitely a different flavor, if you will, right? I mean, patient centricity and empathy, EQ, all the stuff that Bharti and Patrick spoke about continued to be, the guiding principles, if you will, for what we were looking at in terms of driving engagement. And actually, one thing I observed very keenly is being reactive was no longer a bad thing, actually. You could be reactive to the situation because guess what? The situation was evolving itself. And we were really in a mode where we had a significant assessment of our capabilities and maturities that we really embarked on globally, right? Because being in so many markets, having different capabilities and maturities across them, we needed to get a complete picture, and we then obviously engaged the cross-functional teams, breaking down all of the silos and so on and so forth. All of that followed. But we did do a very rapid benchmarking to be able to move forward in a very quick fashion, if you will. So business continuity, while it was extremely important, the EQ aspect was definitely more significant in our actions that we took over a period of time.
Right. So with the benefit of that kind of shock to the system, if you will, now we've got that experience under our belts. Bart, could you maybe start us off in talking about what new models, and we can think about capabilities or strategies for commercialization that we should be exploring for the future, right? Now that we've caught our breath, we're all looking towards the future. What are the new things we should be considering?
Yeah, so let me, first of all, I don't know if I have a magic bullet answer to this question, right? This is something that pharma has been grappling with for decades on how do I change the commercial model, the business model, where can I experiment, where can I take risks? And we have miserably failed, I think, to, adapt the business model so far. So I think what COVID has done is, first of all, forced us to really rethink the model. And, before I maybe talk about some ideas on what we can consider, I think there are a few external KPIs and factors that are important to consider and what's happening in the industry outside that might actually inform our commercial models. So a few things, right? First is just visits, right? Patient visits, the volume of claims, it just dramatically decreased the first few months of COVID, right? And we've seen 40 to 70% decreases in patient volume over the last few months. So, and then you've seen the rise of telemedicine, right? And I think the first few months was a very sharp rise in telemedicine because there was nearly zero telemedicine in most specialties at that time. And now again, I would say in the last few months, the telemedicine levels have declined a bit, right? So the first thing I think to figure out is what is that mix of inpatient telemedicine proportion that's going to continue for the long term. And a lot of it is also linked to reimbursement of telemedicine, I think, for the providers. That's sort of the first. The second big thing is the economic impact. And, how long are we going to see an economic impact? When are we going to how long are we going to see that patients' ability to pay and afford healthcare, like linked to unemployment, right? How long will that last? And again, there are lots of economists actually talking about how long COVID and what are the best and worst case scenarios. And then I think the third thing that might inform the business models is the physician's preference on how they want to engage with pharma. And have they gotten used to the no in-person, right? Or less in-person engagement. And I think it's mixed there, right? It's not a very cookie cutter national approach to everything. It's very local. It depends on the territory or the geography. It depends on the providers. It depends on the specialty as well. So I think with those, at least some of those factors in mind, I think a few areas in the commercial business model that we can look at is one, the whole access, affordability, and patient support services. And it's become, it was always important. And I think it's even more important now and will continue to be in the future. And just getting patients access to the medicines they need and helping providers, offices remove, just the burden and the challenges and the paperwork involved in helping patients get on medicine. All of the services and support around that will continue to really become increasingly important in the overall business model. The second thing, which is, the obvious question is our way of detailing, right? And are we going to have these large field forces that we've had historically? And where will the level of virtual promotion be? And again, there, I don't think there's a cookie cutter answer there. I think there's what this opportunity has given us is just tons of test and learn experiments. And the fact that we can play with, reduced face-to-face, increasing virtual, try it and test it in different places, and really using the full marketing mix, that we've traditionally really over-indexed on face-to-face, but really dialing up different parts of the marketing mix. That's, I think, the other. And then the third business model, if you want to talk about real disruption, is to learn from other industries that do not have large field forces and, really look at the patient as a consumer and see, okay, how do we really engage with patients as well as our physicians who are now, much more digitized and much more used to engaging with us and pharma in different ways, and they've got a different taste of it. So those are sort of at least the, the ways in which we are thinking about it.
Great. Interesting. So Ashish, I know that you've been thinking about some of the same avenues, if you will. So what industry examples or customer experience do you kind of look to for inspiration about how we could operate differently?
Yeah. So John, one of the things that we obviously are looking at is any other regulated industry like ours, right? We are in a very, very regulated industry, and that's a good thing, but it also is restrictive to a certain degree. So we're looking at financial services, for example, or what have you, in terms of how have they transformed within the guardrails of the regulatory ecosystems. And again, I mean, it spans geographies as well, right? It's not just limited to a certain country or a certain geography that those limitations are put on. So definitely that. But we've also established a couple of other principles, right? One thing we've said is simplicity has to be the key, because if it is not simple, then engagement is going to definitely take, I'm not going to say a hit, but it is definitely going to be a challenge. The other piece that we also are really looking at very closely and have embraced is our physicians, our prescribers, outside of the critical and more important work in their lives that they perform, they are human beings just as you and I are. So their behaviors, their embrace of digital technologies and channels is quite similar to ours. It cannot be different. So we are trying to emulate that and bring that to life also in terms of how do we create experiences that are engaging to not just our HCPs, but also reflect how we live, so that it becomes part of their life. So something that Bharti said was important is, what is that continuum that we are going to be establishing, right, in terms of providing them access to, whether it be information, whether it be programs that benefit patients or what have you. But that is something that we are highly focused on and motivated by in terms of inspiration and drawing from the simplicity that some of the other industries are leading us to.
Good. And I know that from our work at DT, one of the factors, if you will, of driving that customer experience is simplicity. So the more we can do that, both I think for our internal employees and our ACP communities or patient communities, it really does matter. Patrick or Florent, I don't know if you guys have comments on the first kind of topic here. I'm going to keep going, or happy for you to chime in.
I think looking at other industries is critical, and we are looking a lot at FMCGs and the way they can create good customer experiences. We're also discovering all the power of the analytics that are behind that we never had in pharma because we were always reliant on one single channel. And I think that's also a big change. Now it's clear that the customer experience, which has been a buzzword in pharma, becomes paramount. And we will need to improve it, to measure it, to be better at creating great customer experiences. And that's really the journey we're on. We had the patient insights. That was already, one good pillar. We had great science, because you need great medicine to have great science. But, probably we have forgotten about the customer. And that's something we're coming back on quite strongly right now.
Good.
The only thing I might add to the equation, John, is I think in pharma, and I think Barty was hitting on this a bit. I think in general, we've learned a lot from consumer marketing, and we've progressed pretty nicely in terms of a digital consumer activation strategy. And I don't know that all pharma has taken those steps in considering their HCP engagement. But I think what is clear is that with COVID and the limitations to access and just the environment that we're having to enter in every day, predominantly it was easy for pharma to have more of a traditional face-to-face engagement strategy. And I don't, with the COVID situation, I don't think that's a luxury that any of us can continue to adhere to. I mean, we're really forced to be much more sophisticated in terms of our overall HCP engagement strategy to go beyond just traditional face-to-face customer facing. And I think that's a thing of the past. We all have to adapt, as I think we've adapted and progressed on the consumer activation strategy perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, just to add to that, right? I mean, there's a lot of conversation within the industry about the reach and frequency model becoming stale and pale, if you will. I think from our perspective, reach and frequency is just going to evolve into what channels are you really going to be deploying to have that effective interaction and availability for the customers out there.
And I think that's definitely part of the secret for the future. And Florent, I think you guys have been working on how to best orchestrate that. So would you like to talk a little bit about the methodologies you're bringing together on customer experience? Yeah,
so that's a multi-stage rocket, right? And we have gone through the first stage. We are not there yet. But what is clear is that you need to get the IT right. I would say, if you don't have the IT right, if you don't have your platforms connected, if you don't have a good, solid IT technology partner, your data is going to be rubbish, and whatever strategy you're going to try to implement is going to fail, like miserably. When people will look at the ROI of the campaign, they will say it's just not working. It's not worth it. Let's go back to the old model. So we started by really getting all the IT layers right. We build a culture of, analytics, data-driven decision-making, which also, in a way, in pharma commercial is not a given, because we have a lot of great data scientists in R&D and very few in commercial. And we need a strong analytical engine to show the return on investment of everything that we do. And then we need to really think I would say, in a very segmented way, the interactions we have with the customers, try to understand which are the ones that they prefer and the one that they dislike, and then be able to deliver to them the message or the information they are looking for in a way that they are happy to consume it. Is it on mobile? Is it on the web? Is it in the morning? Is it in the evening? Everyone has a different way to consume information. We want to go the Netflix way instead of being the NBC way. And, hopefully we'll be more successful with that. But it's not finished. It's a journey.
Yeah. And I think, so you're right. And I kind of look at it, Patrick, is that in the go forward, the sales reps are going to be part of that execution as opposed to a separate area. But some of that analytics is just going to lead us to a conversation about, do we have too many salespeople in that face-to-face changing? What are the considerations that you think are on the table for sales forces today? And also, how do you figure out the launch kind of methodology or volume of face-to-face in the kind of up and down environment we're in?
Yeah, no, great question on sizing. It does start with the overall engagement strategy, and as I think it was already mentioned by several folks, we have to evolve beyond just the traditional face-to-face engagement strategy. And so with that in mind, and more of a multi-channel, omni-channel approach, where you're building things around that rep level engagement, certainly size comes into question. And I think anytime you're considering a change to your field force structure, you have to really reckon with the idea of customer disruption. Any change comes with it a cost of disruption. And so you have to be sensitive to the fact that what sort of optimization benefits are you receiving and at what cost? And so is the juice worth the squeeze, so to speak? Just because you can change doesn't necessarily mean you should. And so assuming that there is a benefit to resizing, you have to understand and plan for and mitigate that disruption that will naturally occur anytime you change your footprint or your reach and frequency model. I think the other thing, if you have committed to a more of an omni-channel approach, you have to then begin to think in terms of sizing beyond the way we've thought about it traditionally, where we've looked at promotion response analytics, we've looked at coverage, product coverage and market coverage, from a traditional jump in the car and drive from clinic to clinic. And so you have to begin to reimagine what is productivity, and with the right technology enablers, how do you redefine productivity? And then based on that, how much more productive, hopefully, can your sales professionals be? And so all those things need to be considered when you're figuring out what is the right customer coverage plan. I mean, literally today with the right technologies, our sales professionals can literally be in two places at one time. They can go make a face-to-face call if they have access to the clinic, and they can go out to their car and jump on their Salesforce automation system and virtually transport themselves to a different part of the territory. So those are all things you have to reconsider in terms of sizing. And then from there, if you're committed to an omni-channel approach, and you've got to make sure you're making the right MarTech investments, and you're supporting that with a strong change management plan, because investments that aren't utilized in the field are just wasted investments. And so there is a reinventing the way of the day in the life of a customer-facing representative. And so those are all things that we need to be thinking about. Disruption, reimagining the role of the rep and how we define productivity, and then having a strong change management plan associated with that to really maximize those changes that you're making.
Yeah, and John, if I could add, I think this is also linked to the business model discussion we were having, right? And so there may be different approaches to what we do going ahead. One is, as Patrick was saying, the rep kind of at the center of the engagement model, right? And where they need to be, how they need to engage, face-to-face, virtually, at what time, depending on which customer has what preference. And then the other one is what I think Florent was talking about, which is the more omni-channel way, where the customer is a part of the overall orchestration, but may not be the central part, right? And again, these are things that we will continue to experiment and evolve, and it's just work in progress. I think it's big test and learn. Yeah,
and Barty, I know that you've got a good chunk of your career was more in the data analytics space. So how has that evolution and what are the continued elements of it that in data analytic utilization that we're going to need in order for this customer experience to be delivered in a way that's more meaningful for whether it's patients or providers?
So this is an exciting time for an analyst. And it's also an exciting time to learn from other industries, to be honest with you. But, first, maybe before I talk about the analytics, I have to agree with Florent. Unless your data and your IT and your technology is in order, you really cannot, take the leap ahead in advanced analytics and data science and AI. You just need the foundation to be there. So having said that, right, and I think a lot of different pharma companies that are probably at different stages of getting the data organized, integrated, automated, new cloud-based technologies and moving to more real time. So I think from an analyst perspective, maybe the way I'll answer that is, what can we learn from other industries? And I think there are a few areas that I think the analytics can really help drive the future. The first one is, learning, basically using predictive technologies. So the next best anything, right? Predicting what the next best patient may be, predicting the next best physician who might adopt your product, predicting the next best channel or tactic or message you should deploy. So the whole next best action, I think, has taken a whole new meaning. The other thing we can learn from other industries, and again, Florent brought up Netflix, is the whole recommendation engine concept, which started in consumer. Right, so recommending what to do next. And as in the case of Netflix, I think 80–90% of their recommendations from their recommendation engine is what viewers use to view their movies, which is, so you can imagine the power of the recommendation engine and how important that team might be, right? And I think it's a huge team as well. So it's just, putting a lot of analytics power users behind it to really do it at full scale. The other area for omnichannel is really connecting the dots and the orchestration engine, tied again to a decision engine. But again, something that is connected, always on, can be real time, that can orchestrate, which channel and what sequence at what time, whether the rep is at the center of it or not. So that's the other exciting piece. And then I think we can also learn from, telecom and financial services industries, because they use a lot of churn analytics to predict churn. And so in our case in pharma, it would be predicting, when a patient might drop off, or when they might discontinue medication, or, getting diagnosis early, right, up front, and reducing the time to diagnosis, which depending on the therapeutic area you're talking about, could be years and years before patients get the right diagnosis. So those could be another one. And then I think in the last one in our whole customer experience that we're talking about, and I think Ashish talked about simplicity, which is how do you create this frictionless customer experience, right? It's just, those words are they're so magical, but they're so difficult to execute, and it really needs all of the operations and the analytics, but everything behind it to be in order before you can actually connect your journey, and you can have a full view of how is your company interacting with customers, regardless of the department, regardless of who, and what does that experience look like from the lens of the customer. So a lot of scope and areas for analytics.
Thanks, Sadhu. Florent, did I insult you by not making you our analytics expert? It looked like you wanted to get in.
No problem. Be my guest. No, I think Bartil really said it and very, very clearly. The only layer I would like to add is the cultural revolution that is necessary to drive this transformation should not be underestimated. It's not only the rep in the field who should be able to accept that the system is recommending the next best content or the next best doctor. It's the C-suite in the company who needs to understand that the system will by itself decide how the campaign is going to go and what the sequencing is going to be. So we need to start trusting a machine that we don't understand. And that's culturally very, very difficult, specifically in pharma, which is very risk averse and where we always like to know what's going to be at the end of the equation. So I think that's a very important cultural dimension on the analytics side.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to build on top of what Bharti and Flora just mentioned, John. Pharma is going to have to become bold about what you do in terms of these experiences, right? We're talking data and we're talking analytics and we're building out automation on top of it, whether it's through ML or AI or what have you. However, unless the user experience itself is something that we are willing to be bold about and be out there and saying, okay, guys, things may or may not work out. So pilots are becoming a big thing for us, especially in terms of what may work in certain geographies and markets and certain therapy areas may not be relevant for others, but at least there is a learning behind it. And, that whole learn quickly and then scale, or, you could learn quickly and then say, okay, fine, we chalk it out to a learning and do not embrace it going forward. Either ways is an extremely important aspect of the agile nature of where we are. As consumers, we are already there, right? I'll download an app. If it works for me for 7 days, it's fine. I'll keep engaging with it. If it does not, it's gone. I'll never know about it for the next few months or years and so on, right? It becomes obsolete in my books. But at the same time, that experimentation, that model, we need to start to learn from it for ourselves in industry context and bring it forward.
Great. And Ashish, maybe you could talk a little bit also about the scaling of some of those capabilities and the willingness of people to embrace that, kind of bouncing off of their lessons in the last 6 months as well.
Yeah, and this is something that Patrick touched upon, and also Edward, right? When we look to scale, the resistance to change prior to March 13th and Friday, it was Friday the 13th, right? When things started to close down and so on. Then on, 1st of April, let's say, things have evolved so much. Teams are now willing to really let those boundaries kind of literally collapse unto themselves and therefore work together, embrace new things. I'll give an example. A European country was willing to share their learnings literally on a daily basis with another geography so that they could continue to evolve it over, leveraging the time differences, if you will, to scale a certain offering that we were bringing out, which was something was never tried out. And those aspects of things, that collaboration and that sense of community, because everybody now has a situation, they're all in the same situation in their own context, but overall faced with the same problem, and therefore working together to solve it has really lent itself to scaling rather rapidly. Projects which we thought would take sometimes, multiple months or years almost to complete have been done in 6 weeks. And you're just stunned. Is it the same set of individuals? How did they come across? And shake hands virtually and move things forward.
Great. Yeah, and Patrick, when you're solving problems like scaling and you're looking at global, regional, local, there's a lot of considerations about what's applicable and what's not. So how do you manage the agility around that kind of multi-level execution?
Yeah, I think there's been a couple comments in terms of trusting the data, and I do think that's important. That requires some change management. But I think it's we need to be careful globally that we're not that there's a good balance of control and trust, and that as you chalk the lines globally and you put controls in place, making sure that we're putting those controls in place on the things that matter, right? Making sure that we're preserving some standards around overall customer experience, making sure that we're preserving a brand experience or positioning and equity and brand equity, But outside of that, all execution is local. And so I do think that we need to sort of chalk the lines and then trust the local customer-facing organization and give them a good menu of decisions that they can make, that we have good faith, good data-based. We develop an offering of data-informed menu offerings locally that then allow the local execution to take place. But I also do believe that in doing so, we can set a global framework that's much more informed if we, both through technology and just grassroots communication, that we do a fair amount of closed-loop processes. We build good closed-loop processes into our strategic brand planning process, that we're getting that local insight into the overarching global plan, and it's a continuous closed-loop feedback loop. Because at the end of the day, if the local team feels like they have authorship in the overall global strategy, then you're going to get better execution, because everyone's going to feel like they had some authorship in that global strategy. So I think we need to trust the data, but we also need to, chalk the lines wide enough, if you will, with enough flexibility for local execution. And then if you've got those good feedback loops into your brand planning process, then you're going to get those local insights that are really informing that global strategy. And when it's delivered back locally, they're going to feel and they're going to understand that their insights were actually recognized, heard, and in some cases, many cases, implemented. So I think it's a little bit of art and science of trusting the data and letting the data inform the decisions, but also giving enough room for local execution. It's a little bit of a balance there that I think we need to try to achieve.
Good. So I'm going to kind of throw you guys one last question. Maybe I'll start with Florent, but in my mind, maybe we haven't talked about new capabilities. I happen to think that live virtual events becomes a new competing ground for share of voice, and recruiting to events like that and putting on high quality, I think, are part of the secret. Now, this is the McCarthy opinion, but I think that together with scheduling FaceTime with sales reps in the face-to-face or virtual setting are other areas where we're competing with FaceTime with our ACP community, either in the more scientific setting like a live virtual event, or with the face-to-face. So Florent, are there new capabilities in that space that we should be exploring or running to?
New capabilities, I don't know, but going to the bottom of what we tried and failed at doing, like, key account management, for instance. I mean, we see now that we can have good scientific-based discussions with HCPs trying to understand their practice, and then they welcome the people who can have those discussions with them. Because everything that is promotional is then left, let's say, to the other channel in the mix. And having this type of capabilities, real people who really understand the science and medicine can have medical discussions, with the physician, is something that we need to do. And we have never done it really before. We have tried here and there. I mean, CAM, I hear it since maybe 2004, 2005, it started in the UK, invented everywhere. So I think this is really something we need to build on. If we have human people talking to the HCPs, we need the best possible quality of interaction, both ways. And definitely, knowing how to create a good customer experience based on a sequence of interactions. I agree, we still have those global brand plans, but before a marketer was delivering 76 slides. Now he will need to deliver 670 snippets of information that's going to feed a machine, that's going to, touch the HCPs. And all of those need to be meaningful, measurable, and have an objective. And that's a completely different new capability. So for me, the role of the marketeers and medical, by the way, because half of the journey is medical education, is disease education, the role of those people are going to change. And that's capabilities, honestly, we don't have at scale, and that we are trying to build right now.
Good.
Yeah. And Florent, I completely agree with you. I think, again, coming from the analytics side, there's a time when the analytics will become easy And it's the change management, the adoption, it's the usage of it, and what do you do with it? What results do you get? How do you measure it? The effort there will be, it's going to be like a 60-40 rule. We just cannot underestimate the change management internally to get to actually use the power of, data science to actually drive decision making and drive omni-channel and drive the customer experience. It's just different roles, different way of operating, different ways of working, different teams in the mix, huge change management.
Ashish, Patrick?
Yeah,
so,
no. Go ahead, Ashish, please.
The underlying fabric or culture, literally, of commercialization, and in your opening comments, John, you mentioned something about commercialization 2.0, but this is truly where we are headed, right? The way we do business is going to have to change. That new normal or next normal that we keep talking about is going to keep evolving. So data is going to be important, empathy, EQ, all of these aspects that not that we did not consider them, but they will all have to now become front of mind rather than at back of mind, and rather than being informative, they will have to lead those customer engagements and interactions that we put together.
Good. Patrick, I'll give you the last word before we move to questions.
Yeah, sure. I think everyone said it. I think it's an obvious statement, but it bears emphasizing that our entire, for the most part, our industry is built on this reach and frequency model. And so we're in the middle of this required change because the environment has changed on us, right? So I think for those organizations that really focus in on the capability evolution that's required, and it's sales, it's marketing, it's advanced analytics, we are literally changing the tire on the bus as it's moving. And I think for those companies that recognize that, get comfortable with that, and are committed to capability building in this to address the needs of this new environment, those will be the ones that will be successful. Those organizations or those commercial leaders that hold on to the antiquated reach and frequency model, I think, are going to find competing effectively very challenging.
Great.
But John, if I may, just one last point, I think it's really important that everything we do it in full transparency to the HCP. Like if we collect data, if we process data, if we do something with it, they need to understand why we are doing it. And it's not only because there is a GDPR, stuff in Europe that is really important. It's because we don't want to end up where Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, and others were at a bad point with bad press again on the industry. So we need the people to understand that what we do it for the customers, for them to have a better customer experience.
Great point. So with that, I will hold us, and we're going to spend just a few seconds in transition, and then we'll address questions from the audience. But thanks to each of you for participation in the panel so far. All right, welcome everybody to the Q&A portion. We've got a lot of good questions in, so let me try in real time kind of organize my panel for a good discussion. One that's kind of related to the conversation we had at the top of the hour was around the immediate transition and all of the digital engagements that we all were moving towards and are still playing, I think, in some 30 or 40% of the audience. So what recommendations or strategies are you implementing to differentiate yourselves from other companies other than content?
I'll jump in, John. I think what we've realized at our company is that the need to continue to think about the medium and what some of the training implications are. And so content needs to be good, but the how one engages virtually is different than walking into an office setting or a clinic setting, nose to nose live. And so even just simple ways of working on how to manage your day and how to maximize the interaction with the physician, that there's an upskilling required, and we've tried to continue to evaluate how can we train our people to be more effective virtually, and that was a learning early on that continues to be a learning for us today.
Good. I heard someone else jumping in there. Florent, go ahead.
The first thing was to be really mindful and respectful of the customer, of the HCP timing, to engage on their term when they want. Because at the beginning, it was very clear they didn't want to see anyone. And then progressively, you could get in. And then not getting in with a marketing message, but getting in with something that can support and help them. And then also a lot of training of the sales team, of the field teams, to be able to engage, because they were very unsure that they could do it, and they required a lot of help and a lot of support. So that was really important for us also in terms of motivation.
Yeah, so in addition to what y'all just said, guys, what we also saw was our sales force was definitely not geared to be a remote sales force, right? They were all field sales force, relationship based, like Patrick said, nose to nose kind of interaction, really good at all of that. But when the model changed to virtual, that training we had to pull in really rapidly to make them aware of not just how to detail remotely, but also be empathetic, having that same level of conversation and personal engagement over a channel where they're not able to, be eyeball to eyeball, if you will, and yet at the same time have that richness of interaction. And it was not always about detailing or pitching or selling. In this case now, how to have that empathetic conversation, because the HCP or the customer in this case was really, engaged in more in caregiving than ever before.
Good.
Yeah, and John, I think from my perspective, I probably bucket it into a few categories, right? The first one is just ensuring that the tools and technologies are available and really engaging with the customers how they want to engage, whether it's Viva Engage or Zoom or Teams or whatever, the customers want. I think the second one around content, I would say content is still pretty important, but not the way we think of traditionally as brand content and, our data, but more in terms of what do the customers want to really talk about? What are the challenges that they're facing that week or that month, right? And is it around patient access? Is it around, not being able to see too many patients? Is it about telemedicine? So I think the content is a big bucket that, we can't say beyond content, what else, but actually adjusting the content so it's relevant and meaningful.
Yeah.
Along with the skill sets is probably the third thing, which is what Ashish was alluding to, that not everybody is a good virtual rep if they're a face-to-face rep, and really getting, to the heart of that.
Yeah, and I like that point, Barty, because I think particularly in our industry, we think about engagement as being advertising, and yet the way we behave in our own lives, we don't go to places to see advertising.
Right.
We go for interesting content and end up seeing advertising. And I think we need to evolve our thinking a bit in that direction as well. A little bit to that point. So we've all been at this for 6 months or so with a different kind of mix. And I'm just wondering the question came in, how did you evolve your channel mix to mitigate risks and maximize opportunities?
I'll be honest, we didn't. I mean, literally, we went where we could, right? We went where we could be listened to, where we could interact, and we tried to learn there. And now that we think about it, and that we are plumbing all the channels behind and all the platform and the thing, we will be able to build a model at, where we optimize. But really, the key question in the last 6 months was, how do we keep serving our customers? How can we help them in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right, John. I mean, it immediately became what sort of technology platforms do we need to enable to be able to continue to interact with our customers beyond just a mobile cell phone device. And so first, let's stand up real virtual capabilities as a replacement for what would be a traditional face-to-face model. And as clinics have opened up, we're quickly realizing that there is a mix that's emerging. Even today, it's still emerging. And so I think that's the next step for us, is to begin to be more sophisticated on HCP campaign engagement. What does that look like? What could that look like? And what are the implications to things like training and technology and mix? And so I would love to say we've cracked that code. But we're not there yet. But we realize going into 2021, we're in this environment, I think, for a period of time that's going to continue for a while. And probably customers are realizing, hey, they, absent a vaccine or not, they may not go back to the way it was. And so we're going to have to adapt to a more optimal HCP engagement strategy.
Yeah, and from our perspective, I think, like I said up front in the initial section, being reactive was okay to what Florent said, right? There was no recipe out there. There was no guideposts for the kind of environment that we were entering in, which continues to evolve on a daily basis as we speak, right? So those aspects where being reactive was now okay, and not everything was planned. We literally formed agile teams that would actually look at the situation and come up with a plan to respond to the given situation, and train and obviously coach our reps and adapt the marketing strategies accordingly. So very reactive, sorry to say that, but it is how we as an industry are going to have to work through this and then come up with plans that help us into the future.
And be okay with uncertainty, right? And pivot.
Absolutely. Yes, Bharti.
So we're into the next question, and I think this is kind of maybe hitting home for what you guys are talking about. So we went from heavily field focused to leveraging other channels, but those channels are still not mature and they operate in silos. So what has to change internally and around org structure to become truly omni-channel? And I'll just remind you, we only have 10 minutes left.
I can start. So first, I don't know if org structure is the only answer to evolving capabilities and really moving to this omni-channel world. I do think that the building blocks of like basic org structures that can work together and collaborate is probably there in most pharma companies. But I do think that there is maybe some work that needs to be done to look at what are the centralized capabilities needed to really fulfill the omni-channel vision. And those may fall in the buckets of data, content, analytics, right? So there are some fundamental capabilities that are required that should be centralized. And I think content becoming more and more important and relevant, as well as the infrastructures that support all of this. But other than that, I think it's, to me, it's just taking sort of similar teams, right? And looking at how you market differently, or how do you sell, adapt your selling process, or how do you adapt your analytics to really help make decisions and drive decision making and really orchestrate that customer experience journey. So I don't know, and I don't know if I necessarily agree that it's a major org chart related solve.
Actually, Bharti, you're absolutely right. 100% agree with you. And in fact, org structure by its very definition, to me, is really constraining and stifling. What we need in these times, and more so as we continue to evolve as an industry, is something which is more fluid and a construct which will enable you to pull in subject matter expertise as is required based upon the prioritized direction for the organization. So the foundational elements that Bharti talked about, 100% agree with that. You need those in place. But given those are in place now, it is the constructs need to be evolved and evolving at all points in time and fluid to be able to align with changing priorities as the market shifts on you.
I think just on this one, there's a fundamental component, which is the culture. If we go into that world of omnichannel, customer-centric, where people have to reconcile their professional self with their personal self, and they want the same customer experience, we completely need to change the culture of the marketing, sales, medical organization. If we go with the culture we have, it's like my grandmother going to a techno parade, right? She won't hear anything, she won't understand anything, she won't be able to talk to anyone, and that's how we are going to end up. So we really need to change the culture.
So Florent, I know from our working together, you were in Japan. How do you think objectives play into that migration of culture?
Objectives of the people in the organization?
Yes.
It's paramount. What gets measured gets done. I mean, if you start to incentivize people on what they do, their behavior is going to change their culture, because at some point you're not what you say, but you are what you do. So it's absolutely critical.
Good, because it doesn't have to. I think to your point, Bart, it doesn't have to be org structure, right? It may be simply adjusting goals that allow for delivery in a different way through the org that exists. Probably easier that way than to announce something different.
And I think also, being clear on priorities and focus, right? Sometimes I just feel like there's so much going on in the organization that the teams might lose track of what, of the 20 things that are going on, or, probably 50 or 100 in each individual siloed. Which ones are the ones that matter organizationally, and where do we put our efforts and pivot, and what do we stop doing?
Good. I thought this was a really interesting question, and because it's not one that I've heard anybody really talk about. So during the course of the pandemic, what have been some of the interesting insights to emerge from the perspective of the sales reps, especially when they're trying to build engagement over remote channels?
I would say, John, that I think we knew this, but I think the relationship still matters. I think even the ability to be able to be successful with more of an omni-channel approach or doing more virtual in absence of the relationship, that creates more challenges to implementation. So I still do think the relationship matters, and we have to be thinking about omni-channel as having that customer-facing role in the center of all this. I don't necessarily believe this is about replacing selling efforts. It's just the selling effort's going to look different in an omni-channel approach. And then I think Barty mentioned it as well. I think really forcing us to think beyond our brand and beyond our the expectation that our customers are having in terms of content goes well beyond our brand, our specific brand, our portfolio. And so we have to be willing to be comfortable bringing better information and a higher value information that's clearly been a learning for us, for sure.
Yeah, one of the things that we've observed is the openness to the complementary nature of omni-channel communications to field sales has really been seen a significant boost. Earlier, there was those that embraced omni-channel capabilities, but now everybody knows that it is something which is the way of the future, and so everybody's open to it. That's been a huge learning for us.
Beyond the lack of self-confidence the rep expressed, they were very, very clear about the fact that the customer wants to be engaged on the platform of his choice. And they asked us to enable some platform that we didn't have. Like in Ireland, they say to talk to the guys in the hospital, we have to use Zoom because their firewall allows only Zoom, and they are used to Zoom. In Latin America, they wanted to use WhatsApp because that's the tool that the physicians are using, and they want to be engaged on that. So I think that was a learning for us, that we are not the one driving where the exchange and interaction takes place. The customer is not driving it.
Great. Any other comments on the Salesforce learning? All right, so I think we are right up against our time. So I just want to thank each of the panelists. You guys have been great to interact with, and obviously this has been over a couple of weeks to prep and deliver. So thank you for that. I'm inviting everybody to move on to the keynote 6, which is Richard Ashworth, and should be an interesting way to wrap up the time that we have spent together. So good luck and hope to see all of you soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.